Have you ever considered that this reality, the one you're so certain of, might actually be the final test? What if everything happening now, from global chaos to personal struggles, isn't random suffering, but a meticulously designed simulation? A final examination before liberation. The Archons, those hidden controllers of our reality, may have created their most sophisticated game yet, making awakening seem impossible precisely when it's closest at hand. The ultimate cosmic trick is convincing you that freedom is unreachable while it stands right before you, waiting to be recognized. This paradox defines our moment in history. As the veils thin between worlds, as ancient prophecies converge with quantum revelations, we find ourselves at the precipice of the greatest awakening humanity has ever known, yet simultaneously facing what appears to be insurmountable darkness. This contradiction is not accidental. It is perhaps the final test designed to separate those who truly remember their divine nature from those who remain entranced by the illusion. What follows may forever change how you perceive not only the world around you, but the very nature of your existence within it. The revelation I'm about to share with you has been carefully guarded throughout human history. It appears in fragments across the Nag Hammadi texts, whispered in the suppressed teachings of Gnostic masters, and coded within the Gospel of Thomas. These ancient manuscripts, discovered buried in earthen jars in the Egyptian desert, were hidden for a reason. They contained knowledge so transformative that those who controlled the narrative of reality couldn't allow it to spread freely. The Pistis Sophia speaks of this moment, this precise historical juncture, when humanity would face its final trial before liberation. The Archons, knowing their time of influence was ending, would create their most convincing illusion yet, a world seemingly beyond redemption, where awakening appears futile. This ancient wisdom reveals that when the darkness seems most impenetrable, that's precisely when the light is about to break through. The controllers of this reality have always known that their greatest weapon is not force, but the cultivation of spiritual hopelessness, convincing the divine spark within you and that it's too small to ignite the flames of transformation. These teachings were buried, burned, and systematically erased from our collective memory because they contain the exact keys needed for this moment in human evolution. They reveal that what we're experiencing now isn't the collapse of humanity, but the collapse of an artificial construct that has imprisoned humanity. The game is ending not because we've failed, but because enough of us have begun to remember. If these words resonate within the deepest chambers of your being, if you feel a stirring of recognition beyond intellectual curiosity, then you are among those who came here for this moment. This space, this transmission, exists for the remembering ones, those who agreed, before incarnating into this reality, to be present for the final act of a cosmic drama that has spanned millennia. The journey ahead requires courage, discernment, and a willingness to question everything you've been taught about reality. By continuing with us, you're not simply consuming content, you're activating ancient codes of remembrance that have been dormant within your DNA, waiting for the precise vibrational key to unlock them. Every view, every shared moment of recognition strengthens the field of awakening that now encircles our planet. Join us in this sacred remembering. Subscribe to this channel of transmission not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in the greatest story ever told, the liberation of consciousness from artificial constraints. Each subscription represents another light joining the constellation of awakening, another soul declaring, "I remember why I came." To understand the game we're playing, we must first understand its architects. In Gnostic cosmology, the Archons are not physical entities, but emanations of a consciousness that the ancient texts called the Demiurge, the false god who mistook himself for the true creator. This Demiurge, born from Sophia's fall, from the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality, created our material world as an imperfect copy of the true divine realms. The Archons, as extensions of the Demiurge's consciousness, became the administrators of this simulated reality, the programmers of the Matrix, if you will. These Archons are not demons in the religious sense, but rather psychic forces that operate through patterns of control, limitation, and forgetting. They maintain their influence not through overt domination, but through sophisticated systems of distraction and spiritual amnesia. Their primary strategy has always been to keep humanity identified with the body and its survival needs, trapped in fear, and disconnected from our true nature as divine consciousness having a temporary human experience. The hypostasis of the Archons, another recovered Gnostic text, describes how these entities cannot create true reality, but can only imitate it, creating convincing simulations that capture our attention and energy. They feed not on our flesh, but on our focus, our emotional reactions, and most importantly, our forgotten divinity. The more we identify with the limited self, the personality construct, the social identity, the physical body, the more we voluntarily participate in their game. Sophia's story is particularly relevant to our current moment. Her fall from the pleroma wasn't a punishment, but a sacrifice, a divine immersion into matter to plant the seeds of awakening within the very fabric of the simulation. Her essence became fragmented throughout creation, with a spark of her divine wisdom embedded within each human soul. This is why the Archons fear human potential above all else, because each awakened human represents a portion of Sophia remembering herself, reclaiming her power, and ultimately dismantling the false reality from within. The eons, eternal realms of divine fullness, represent the true structure of reality beyond the simulation. They are states of consciousness, not physical locations, that exist in perfect harmony and creative expression. Our homesickness, our inexplicable longing for something beyond this world, is the echo of our connection to these realms. We are not evolving toward divinity. We are remembering the divinity that we already are. This cosmology isn't merely an ancient myth. It's a precise map of consciousness that describes the very architecture of the game we're now completing. The final test before liberation involves recognizing these patterns not as distant theological concepts, but as the very structure of your daily experience. The Archons aren't out there. They operate through thought patterns, cultural programming, and systems of belief that keep you identified with the limited self rather than your boundless nature. What if the greatest trick wasn't convincing you that the devil doesn't exist, but convincing you that you do, as a separate, limited, vulnerable entity in a hostile universe? This is the core deception that the final test is designed to challenge. Let us now translate these mythic symbols into the language of direct experience. The Demiurge isn't merely an ancient cosmic figure. It's the egoic mind that each of us contends with daily. This false creator constantly generates a narrative of separation, lack, and fear. It constructs an identity built from memories, cultural conditioning, and survival strategies, then convinces you that this construct is who you truly are. The sophistication of this deception cannot be overstated. The ego doesn't just create the prison. It convinces you that the prison is the totality of existence. The Archons, as extensions of this demiurgic consciousness, manifest as the specific thought patterns and emotional reactions that maintain the illusion. They are the inner voices that whisper unworthiness, that demand conformity, that insist on separation from others and from life itself. They are the automated responses that pull you from presence into worry about the future or regret about the past. Most insidiously, they are the subtle convictions that spiritual liberation is for someone else, somewhere else, sometime else, never here, never now, never you. Sophia's fall and fragmentation represents the forgetting of our divine nature as we incarnate into physical form. Yet her presence remains as intuition, that knowing beyond knowing, that wisdom beyond the mind's capacity to reason. When you experience moments of inexplicable connection, when synchronicities reveal the intelligent fabric of reality, when love dissolves the boundaries of self, These are glimpses of Sophia remembering herself through you, the Kyun. Aeons translate into states of consciousness available to you right now, not after death, not after decades of spiritual practice, but in this very moment when thinking subsides and presence floods in. They are the peace that passes understanding, the compassion that embraces all beings, the creativity that channels something greater than the individual self. These states aren't rewards for good behavior. They are your birthright, your natural condition. When the archonic programs temporarily lose their grip, the most profound reinterpretation concerns the nature of the final test itself. What if this test isn't measuring your worthiness for liberation, but your readiness to recognize that you were never truly imprisoned? What if the game was designed not to evaluate your spiritual advancement, but to exhaust your belief in separation to the point where you simply cannot maintain it any longer? Consider this. The Archons' most sophisticated deception is convincing spiritual seekers that awakening is a distant achievement rather than the ever-present reality beneath conceptual thinking. The spiritual ego, perhaps the most refined archonic program, creates an identity around seeking, around future attainment, around specialness. It transforms liberation into yet another object to be acquired by the separate self, thereby strengthening the very illusion it claims to transcend. The final test before liberation may be nothing more than seeing through this last, most subtle deception, recognizing that what you seek is what seeks. That consciousness isn't something you have, it's what you are. That awakening isn't an event in time, but the recognition of the timeless witnessing every event. Perhaps the ultimate cosmic joke is that what we've been searching for so desperately has been the very awareness with which we've been searching. When this recognition dawns, not as concept but as lived reality, the game reveals itself as exactly what it always was: a temporary agreement to forget in order to remember, to separate in order to reunite, to create limitation in order to rediscover infinity. And in that revelation, the Archons are neither defeated nor destroyed. They're simply seen for what they truly are. Aspects of the divine play without the power to define your essential nature. If what you've heard resonates with the deepest part of your being, not the mind that analyzes, but the heart that knows, let this resonance be acknowledged. The simple act of recognizing truth when you encounter it is itself a powerful declaration to the universe. It signals that another fragment of consciousness has broken free from the hypnotic trance of separation. By engaging with this transmission, not just intellectually, but with your full presence, you strengthen the morphic field of awakening that now encompasses our planet. Each recognition, each moment of clarity, each heart that opens to these ancient yet immediate truths creates ripples through their collective consciousness. The Archons game depends on isolation and the belief that awakening is a solitary journey. Yet nothing dissolves their illusion more quickly than the acknowledgement that we are remembering together. The gesture of leaving alike is more than digital approval. It's a conscious participation in the spread of liberating wisdom. It declares, "This truth has found its mark within me. I stand with those who remember." In a reality where so much of our attention is harvested for purposes that don't serve our highest evolution, consciously directing that attention toward awakening is itself a revolutionary act. If you feel called to acknowledge this resonance, to join your light with others who are remembering, let that be expressed, not from obligation, not from habit, but as a deliberate act of conscious participation in the greatest awakening humanity has ever known. Each such acknowledgement helps others find these transmissions in a digital landscape designed to prioritize distraction over remembrance. Now, let's bring this understanding into the lived reality of your daily experience. How does the Archons game manifest in your life right now? Perhaps it appears as the constant anxiety about the future that pulls you from the only moment where life actually exists, this one. Notice how often your mind time travels to imagined scenarios, most of which never materialize. robbing you of the peace available in presence. Or perhaps you recognize the game in the voice of the inner critic, that archonic program that constantly measures, judges, and finds you lacking. Have you noticed how this voice is never satisfied? Achievement of one goal merely shifts the target, ensuring you remain in perpetual striving, never arriving at the worthiness it promises but never delivers. The game appears in the endless comparisons to others, in the social media feeds designed to trigger envy and inadequacy, in the consumer culture that creates desires you never had until you were told you should have them. It manifests as the news cycles that keep you in perpetual fear, the divisive politics that convince you other humans are enemies rather than reflections of yourself in different circumstances. Most subtly, the game operates through spiritual materialism, the collection of experiences, practices, and insights that become new possessions for the spiritual ego. Have you noticed how awakening itself can become another achievement, another identity, another way to feel separate and special? This is the Archon's most sophisticated strategy, to transform the very path to freedom into another, more beautiful prison. The final test appears in moments of choice. Will you continue to feed these patterns with your attention and belief, or will you recognize them as the temporary constructs they are? Will you identify with the character in the game, or will you remember yourself as the awareness in which the entire game appears? Consider your relationships. How often do you relate to the roles, expectations, and past patterns rather than the living presence of the being before you? How frequently do you sacrifice authentic expression for social approval? Each such compromise is a voluntary participation in the archonic simulation. Your work life, too, reveals the game, the trading of your irreplaceable life energy for survival or status, often in service to systems that perpetuate collective forgetting. The final test asks, can you bring consciousness even here? Can you participate in these systems while remembering they are not the totality of what you are or what life offers? Even your spiritual practice can become co-opted by the game when it transforms into another should, another striving, another way to fix what was never broken. The final test before liberation might be as simple as recognizing that you've been trying to awaken from a sleep that isn't real, to fix a self that doesn't exist apart from thought, to reach a destination that has been your starting point all along. What if the chaos we're witnessing collectively, environmental, political, economic, social, isn't evidence of failure, but the necessary dismantling of systems built on forgetting? What if this isn't the end of the world, but the end of an illusion about the world? The final test asks not whether you can escape the chaos, but whether you can see through it to the birth of something unprecedented. All these seemingly separate threads, the ancient Gnostic cosmology, the psychological patterns of the ego, the social structures that maintain forgetting, the daily choices that either reinforce or dissolve the illusion, are actually aspects of a single integrated understanding. The Archon's game operates simultaneously at all these levels because consciousness itself is undivided. The same patterns that manifest in individual psychology appear in collective systems, in spiritual seeking, and in cosmic mythology. The divine spark that the Gnostics spoke of isn't separate from the awareness reading these words right now. The Sophia who fell into matter isn't different from the wisdom that stirs within you when conceptual thinking subsides. The liberation that ancient texts promised isn't distinct from the freedom you experience in moments of complete presence when the narrative of past and future temporarily dissolves and only life remains. This integration reveals why the final test before liberation must encompass all aspects of experience. It's not enough to understand these concepts intellectually while emotional patterns remain unchanged. It's not sufficient to transform personal psychology while participating uncritically in collective systems of forgetting. The test requires wholeness, the recognition that awakening isn't an escape from any aspect of life, but a radical embrace of all of it from a new perspective. The Archons game can only continue with your unconscious participation. Their power derives not from their inherent strength, but from human belief and attention. This is why consciousness itself, not action, not resistance, not escape, is the key to the game's conclusion. As more humans remember who they are beyond the programmed identity, the game naturally transforms from within. What the ancient Gnostics discovered through contemplation, modern quantum physics confirms through observation. Consciousness is fundamental to reality, not an epiphenomenon of matter. The observer cannot be separated from the observed. The player cannot be extracted from the game. Liberation doesn't involve escaping the simulation, but recognizing your role in creating it, moment by moment, through the power of conscious attention. This integration of ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding reveals that the final test before liberation isn't a distant event, but an ongoing invitation, available in each moment, to remember the truth of who you are beyond all concepts, all identities, all limitations. We began with a paradox, that the darkest hour might be the moment just before dawn, that apparent hopelessness might precede the greatest awakening. Now perhaps you can see this paradox from a new perspective. What if the darkness itself is not an obstacle, but a necessary contrast that makes the light recognizable? What if the apparent intensification of suffering, both personal and collective, is not a sign of regression, but the necessary pressure that finally cracks open the shell of separation? The Archons' hidden game was never designed to last forever. Like all games, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The rules that seemed so solid, the limitations that appeared so fixed, the identities that felt so real, all were temporary agreements made for the purpose of experience, for the joy of remembering what was temporarily forgotten. In the silence beyond words, in the space between thoughts, in the awareness that witnesses both joy and sorrow without becoming either, here is the freedom that was never lost, only temporarily obscured. Here is the realization that renders the final test not a fearsome ordeal, but a gentle awakening from a dream that has served its purpose. Perhaps the ultimate revelation is that there was never anything to fear, never anything to fix, never anywhere to go. The journey from imprisonment to liberation was itself part of the illusion, a compelling story told by thought and believed by a character who existed only within the story itself. When the storyteller is recognized as just another story, what remains is what was always present, the silent, spacious awareness in which all stories, all games, all realities arise and dissolve. And so the final test before liberation may simply be this: can you allow everything to be exactly as it is, while recognizing that what you truly are is not contained within any of it? Can you participate in the game with full engagement while remembering it is just a game? Can you honor the human journey with all its joy and sorrow, while resting in the recognition that your essence remains untouched by any of it? In this recognition, the Archons are neither enemies to be defeated nor illusions to be escaped. They are aspects of the divine play that have served their purpose in the evolution of consciousness. The game they created was never a punishment, but a gift, a temporary forgetting that makes remembering possible, a limitation that allows infinity to experience itself from countless perspectives. I invite you to sit with this question, not as something to be answered by the mind, but as a contemplation that opens into direct experience. What within you has remained unchanged throughout your entire life? What aspect of your being has witnessed every thought, every emotion, every experience without itself being affected by any of it? If you've glimpsed this unchanging awareness, if you've tasted this freedom that needs no achievement because it's already fully present, share a single word below that captures this recognition. Perhaps awake, presence, home, or any expression that resonates with your direct experience. This isn't merely a comment. It's a declaration of remembrance that strengthens the field of awakening for all beings. Let your voice join the chorus of those who remember, creating a resonance that helps others recognize what has always been here, waiting patiently beneath the noise and drama of the Archons' final game.